morning. I'm John.
I'm Michaela. And I'm Quinlan.
And our research was focused on finding an alternative solution to the current issues in the meat industry in America, and we came to the solution of in vitro meat. So firstly, it's important to gain an understanding of the context of the current industry as a problem. The weight of the issue, or the beef, if you will, actually rests in the growth of the human population over time. As this graph from the Model United Nations points out, as the human population steadily increases, it is accompanied by an exponential growth in meat production, as Americans' diets have grown to heavily incorporate meat. Scientists Zebahat and Heinebahat have grown increasingly concerned about this, estimating that by 2050, meat production will have to rise to over 465 million tons in order to cope with having over 9 billion people on the planet. When looking at the negative impacts of the current industry, it is clear that this statistic is alarming.
So the current meat industry has detrimental environmental effects. According to environmental researcher Stephen Schwarzer from the United Nations Environmental Protection Agency, animal agriculture contributes to 10 to 35% of global greenhouse gas emissions, as shown by this graph. The graph also shows a further breakdown of the gases emitted, such as carbon dioxide and methane. Also, animal agriculture takes up 26% of the Earth's ice-free land surface, which in the future this land will be needed for urbanization and development as our population continues to grow. And lastly, animal agriculture contributes to over 70% of water quality problems in navigable rivers and streams, according to Trey Norton, an environmentalist. These issues, as well as issues in other spheres, suggest that a change is necessary.
In addition to the harm inflicted upon the environment as a result of the large-scale meat industry, the current in vitro meat industry also raises concern for the morality of the practice of raising animals for slaughter. Specifically, environmental lawyer Kevin Schneider discusses concentrated animal feeding operations, or CFOs for short, which, as signified by the name, represents animals repressed into small confined areas for feeding, as displayed by these images. This practice results in uncleanliness and is a breeding ground for foodborne illnesses such as E. coli. Additionally, the effects of the current meat industry extend to animals outside of the agricultural sector. Environmentalist Matt McDermott discusses how, as there is an increased demand for need for land for cultivation, there is also an increase in deforestation and hereby habitat destruction. Overall, the immorality of factors such as these is the driving force behind the ideologies of vegetarianism and veganism, both of which exclude meat from their diets. Personally, these factors that I have discussed have led me to exclude meat from my diet and actually follow vegetarian practice because I do not personally find these practices to be currently sustainable or moral.
So this mentality is what motivates people to become vegetarian or vegan, which is a potential solution to this problem. However, this solution is not realistic. As shown by this graph, 12% of Americans are or ever have been vegetarian or vegan, and it's unrealistic and frankly impossible to require the other 88% to completely exclude meat from their diets. Additionally, ethicists Clive Thompson and Maddie Wilkes say that American meat consumption is actually on the rise despite increased education on the practices of the meat industry, rendering this solution implausible.
Entomophagy, the consumption of insects, is another proposed solution that various scientists and agriculturalists have taken to, as it would extremely alleviate the environmental pressures of the current industry. Additionally, insects are nutritionally a great alternative to meat, and the system would be low-tech and a less expensive option. However, as the Food and Agricultural Organization points out in the report on entomophagy, eating insects is considered taboo in Western societies, as in consumers will just simply not take to it. Additionally, this graph from the report shows that America has considerably less edible insects compared to other countries where entomophagy is thriving, showing that this solution is simply not feasible.
With the limitations of the mentioned solutions weighing so heavily, we find the best solution to be found within the implementation of in vitro or lab cultured meat. So in order to provide a foundation for this process, you must first understand the scientific methodology behind it. There are many different processes for 3D bioprinting to produce complex structures of organic tissue. However, the method we will be focusing on most today is the most efficient method known as the scaffolding-based technique, as demonstrated by the diagram presented. This process begins with the extraction of embryonic myosomes, or a precursor to fully differentiated muscle cells, from the desired livestock, which are then able to proliferate inside a bioreactor for proper growth conditions. These cells that are now differentiated into muscle fibers are placed onto a scaffold, or a 3D printed structure created with different pore sizes and interconnectivity to support cell growth, hence where the technique gets its name. The cells on the scaffold differentiate into myotubes and then myofibers, which are the final multinucleated stage of a muscle cell, which can then be extracted and used as in vitro meat for consumption. Overall, the scientific methodology of this process reveals the efficiency due to technologically advanced methodology, health benefits due to reduced unclean conditions and foodborne illnesses, and morality due to lack of mistreatment and slaughtering of animals.
In addition to the efficiency, health benefits, and morality, the solution also has great and significant environmental benefits. Statistics from the Journal of Science and Technology reveal that in vitro meat production would involve 96% lower greenhouse gas emissions, 99% lower land use, 96% lower water use, and 45% lower energy use than the current system. This goes to show just how beneficial in vitro meat is over current practices, as it would allow us to sustain an environmentally stable future. Additionally, other benefits could result from these benefits, such as the available land being put then to opportunities for urbanization to cope with having that increasing population, for instance.
So, in addition, this solution of in vitro meat also helps the animals within the current meat industry. So, as supported by the scientific process of in vitro meat we had previously discussed, animals would no longer be raised for the sole purpose of slaughter, and instead would only have to endure the extraction of embryonic stem cells, rather than the mistreatment that they face in the current livestock industry today.
So there are some limitations to the solution of in vitro meat, one of the main ones being cost. According to Trey Norton, the first in vitro hamburger was produced and consumed in London in 2013, and it cost $325,000. Obviously, at these prices, in vitro meat is not able to be commercialized. Another limit is unnaturalness and consumer attitudes. Most people find lab-grown meat to be weird or unnatural, so this would deter many people from relying on this innovation.
This is the most serious limit to the solution, as the consumers who would be willing to incorporate the in vitro meat into their diets hold the true power in determining its success. This is why ethicists Maddie Wilkes and Clive Thompson have attempted to gain an understanding of the consumer attitudes in America by conducting a survey in 2016 to see the opinions of adults on in vitro meat. Their results suggested that nearly 2/3 of the sample would be willing to engage with in vitro meat, with only 1/5 stating they would not try it. However, they found that the willingness to eat it regularly was reduced, with only 1/3 of the sample being willing to completely switch to it, showing once again that the consumer attitudes are the primary limit, as consumer hesitancy could pose an obstacle to in vitro meat's development.
So these limits to in vitro meat can easily be overcome. Widespread consumer education on the processes of in vitro meat can definitely alleviate concerns about consumer hesitancy. We are confident that once people learn about the processes behind in vitro meat, they will realize that this meat is not substantially different than the meat that they eat today. Most Americans are substantially distanced from their sources of food anyway, so it would not result in a great change in American food culture. Also, the FDA does not require any labeling on in vitro meat products as long as they are cellularly indistinguishable from conventionally produced products, and this fact alleviates concerns about the safety and sustainability of in vitro meat. Also, IVM companies can market the product in such a way that consumers are aware of the benefits that come with in vitro meat, and this will pursue its popularity.
In relation to its astronomical cost, in vitro meat is not currently economically sound. However, this problem can be easily overcome through the widespread use of 3D bioprinting technology. As the technology continues to develop and expand, it becomes more common and reasonable with regards to consumers. Additionally, one problem faced is the result of job displacement due to the implementation of a completely different industry. However, when you can overweigh this problem of job displacement when you view that there are actually more jobs being created in STEM-based fields such as geneticists who work behind the process, and then also increased demand for people to upkeep the animals that are used for embryonic cell extraction.
So overall, environmental scientists and animal welfare activists are in agreement that the current meat industry is deplorable. The detriments it brings to the environments, animals in and surrounding the system, and the culture suggest that a change is necessary. This system is unsustainable now, and in the future, as the population continues to grow, it will continue to be worse for our world.
With such a dire need for change within our current society, we look to in vitro meat as a solution. Through the examination of the scientific processes and the benefits behind in vitro meat, we find that it is overall the best solution due to its efficiency, morality, and health benefits over other solutions we mentioned as entomophagy, vegetarianism, and veganism, and in comparison to the current meat industry.
Bioethicists Schaefer and Savalescu put it best, stating that once the system and technology is in place and prices have fallen and safety has been ensured, we can expect in vitro meat to be the primary method of food production in America. Thank you.
John, describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
So Michaela focused on the environmental lens in her IRR, and it made me think differently about our solution because seeing how relevant it was to environmental issues and how beneficial it was made me realize that in all sectors it is the best solution rather than just my own ethical lens, knowing that it was the best ethical solution. I saw that there was a huge push from even interest groups like PETA, shown on the one slide, as they even held a competition in 2013 to see if anyone could bring in vitro meat to the market. Once again, all of this revealing to me that in vitro meat can be the best solution and that consumers can overcome their initial hesitancy.
Quinlan, how did the group decide to include John's perspective and research into the overall presentation?
So John's individual research focused on consumer attitudes, so his research actually played a big part in not only the limitations, but also the refutations within our overall conclusion. So his limitations, as we mentioned, was the unnaturalness consumers' view upon in vitro meat and how they could appear to deter from that original solution. But we also found within his research refutation to overcome that initial limitation, as in through educating the overall population, we can grow support for in vitro meat, and overall it added to our conclusion that in vitro meat was the best solution through being able to overweigh the limitations he produced.
Michaela, having finished your project, what, if anything, do you consider to be a gap in your team's research that, if addressed, would make you feel more confident about your conclusion?
Well, in our presentation, we did address the issues of cost and job displacement with the solution of in vitro meat, although none of us looked at the economic lens in our individual research reports. So I believe that if we had delved more deeply into the economic lens, we would have a more well-rounded view of the effects in vitro meat would have on our society.